World of Warcraft Beyond the Dark Portal by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 13. Khadgar was in a meeting hall, one of the few completely finished structures in Nethergard. He had wanted to stay on the parapet and continue lending his hand against the horde, but Trollian had convinced him to rest for a few minutes and eat something. Archmage, or not, you are no good to us if you are fainting from hunger or fatigue, his friend had pointed out. It was a sound advice, and so Khadgar had let himself be led over here and had dutifully eaten a bowl of stew someone had placed in front of him. He remembered that much, and now he supposed he must have fallen asleep. He was dreaming, and the dream was bittersweet. For the dream, Khadgar was young. He turned his clean-shaven face to the night sky and let the moon bathe it. The wind tousled his hair that was dark save for the single streak of white. He lifted his hands, marveled at how young and strong they looked, ungnarled and unspotted. He strode across Lordaeron like a giant, each step carrying him whole leagues, his head brushing the clouds. It was night, yet he walked surely, without hesitation. His feet knowing the way, he found himself heading towards Darlaron, and forded the lake on one step to stand aside the Mage City. Light poured from a single room in the Violet Citadel, despite the late hour, and Khadgar focused his attention there. He began to float upward, growing smaller as he approached the room. As his feet touched on the balcony, he was normal-sized again. The door was open, and he entered, pushing aside the gauze curtains that kept all bugs out, allowed moonlight. Welcome, Khadgar. Okay, come, join me. Khadgar was not surprised to see Antonidas there, and to realize that these were the Kirin Tor leader's own chambers. He sat in the proffered chair, accepted a glass of wine from the other Archmage, assumed it was that for once Antonidas, with his long brown beard just beginning to gray, actually looked the senior. Normally, it was Khadgar whom strangers thought the elder mage, thanks to his snow-white beard, and even though, in reality, Antonidas had several decades of experience over him. Thank you, Khadgar said quietly, after they'd both sipped at their wine a moment. He gestured at his boyish face, his powerful, slim youth body. For this. Antonidas looked a bit uncomfortable. I thought I would make it as pleasant as possible. I've missed it. Being young. I wouldn't change a thing. Medivh had to be stopped, and most of the time I didn't mind, but sometimes I miss it. I know. Khadgar changed the subject. I take this is no ordinary dream. Antonidas shook his head. No, unfortunately not. I have grave news to impart. The Black Dragonflight has allied itself with the Horde. It took a great deal of will not to choke on his wine. The Black Dragonflight, Khadgar repeated. But what of the Red? The two Dragonflights were mortal enemies. His host shrugged. They have not been seen for some time. Maybe that they have finally broken the Horde's control, he frowned. But the Orcs have found new allies, and it seems to us willing ones this time. Khadgar shook his head. They are heading towards Nethergard. We don't know, Antonidas admitted. Perhaps they have already been here, and to Alterac as well. His frown became a full-fledged scowl. They stole the Eye of Darlaron, Khadgar. The Eye? Khadgar knew well what kind of blow that was to Darlaron. But what does the Horde want with it? I do not know. But they were here specifically to steal it, Antonidas confirmed. A handful of Death Knights managed to get past all our defenses, take it, and use the dragons to escape. Dragons that shortly thereafter slaughtered the Alliance forces watching Alterac, no doubt at the traitor Paranold command. Khadgar made a face. I wonder how Paranold managed that. Yet another mystery. I know how much you are dealing with already, Khadgar, but I thought you should know. Thank you, Khadgar told him, and meant it. Yes, I'd rather know. He frowned thoughtfully, reaching to stroke his beard, and momentarily nonplussed to find only his bare chin. And perhaps I can find out even more why these things happened. First, the Book of Mundiv, now the Eye of Dalaran. Why these specifically? He set his wineglass down on Antonides' desk and stood reluctantly. I should get back. Back to being a boy in an old man's body. Back to watching Illyria and Tyrolian enact a painful drama of denial and hurting and solitude when any fool could see they would be stronger and happier together. Back to fighting orcs and closing portals and bearing the weight of the world on his artificially aged shoulders. He sighed heavily. As you wish. Good luck, my boy. Antonius waved his hand and Khadgar awoke, sitting up at Netherguard, meeting room table. He was back in his elderly body now, and felt a wistful pang as he regarded his withering hands and long white beard. Rising, Khadgar left the dream and the meeting hall behind. He spotted Tyrolian and a few others at the main gate. They were clustered around a new prisoner. They looked up as he approached and stepped back. The Archmage suppressed a shudder as he saw the creature's rotting once human face and glowing red eyes. Khadgar! Tyrolian called as he noticed his friend. I was just about to send for you. I assume you need my help with this one? Was the light ineffective? Tyrolian looked frustrated. Quite to the contrary. His reaction was so extreme I was afraid I was going to kill him. I thought perhaps you... Of course. Khadgar sank down to a crouch beside the prisoner, meeting his fiery gaze. Do you have a name, Death Knight? The creature merely snarled, writhing against its bonds. They held fast, however. If that is the way you want it, said Khadgar, shrugging. He summoned power to him, then focused that power into a tight beam. The spell easily pierced the horde creature's defenses, as Tyrolian's light probably had, but although the Death Knight stiffened, he was not so maddened by agony he could not speak, and speak he would. Your name. The Death Knight glared at him, murder in his eyes, but his mouth opened and formed the words to accord. Reaper. Good. Now, how did the horde reopen the portal? Khadgar demanded, as Tyrolian and the others crowded close behind him. Nezul, it replied. Nezul used the skull of Gul'dan to force the reopening again. Is such thing possible? Tyrolian asked. Entirely, Khadgar said. It's starting to make sense now. We know Gul'dan created the dark portal in the first place, working together with Medivh. It is likely that his realm would still have a link to it, and therefore could be used to gain greater control over the rift, just like the Book of Medivh. Nezul had needed Gul'dan, or at least his skull, to open the rift again, and without the skull, Khadgar couldn't shut it either, not completely. Now, he understood why the rift had remained before. Without using Gul'dan's skull, Khadgar would never be able to seal the rift for good. And without the book, he wouldn't be sure he was using the right spell. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Glancing up, he saw Tyrolian gesturing him to step away. Puzzled, Khadgar replied. Good news, Tyrolian said. Our forces are driving the horde back towards the dark portal. We also had word from Admiral Proudmoore other groups of orcs are running too. Apparently a band of horde orcs, backed by black dragons, if you can believe it, stole several boats from Minithil Harbor recently. Khadgar sighed, remembering his dream conversation with Antonidas. I can believe it. Wait. You said boats? Aye. They headed southwest to the Great Sea. Khadgar gripped Tyrolian's tunic. Southwest, damn it! What is it, Khadgar? They're not running. The boats, they were heading to the tomb of Sargeras. Gul'dan tried that once, and it killed him. Why would the orcs do that? Medivh is dead, and Sargeras is gone. The tube's empty. His eyes widened slightly. Isn't it? It all clicked into place. Sargeras is gone, Khadgar said slowly, but that doesn't mean the tomb is empty. We know the orcs are seeking artifacts. What if Sargeras had left something there? The tomb was shielded so no creature of Azeroth could enter, but the orcs were never from here. The wardings would mean nothing to them now, just as they meant nothing to Gul'dan when he... That's it. That's got to be it. Khadgar turned back to the Death Knight and dropped to his knees beside the creature. Why didn't Izuel send the orcs to Tomb of Sargeras? He demanded. Gaz Soul Ripper laughed, foul breath from dead lungs caressing Khadgar's face. He pulled tightly into himself in a few moments of respite and was not about to say anything. Khadgar frowned. He extended his magic once again, this time without any effort at finesse, and the elimination of his spell was like a lance to the creature's forehead. Soul Ripper ached in agony, but stayed silent. Tell us! They care nothing for your world! Soul Ripper grunted, his hands clenching. Khadgar made a subtle move with his fingers, and this time Gaz Soul Ripper cried out. I need better than that. The dead thing bit its lips in pain, teeth sinking easily through rotten flesh. A destiny greater than you can imagine, human. Khadgar's heart sped up. These half-truths, these hints. What was the reality? Sweat dotted his forehead, but not from exertion. He tightened his grip, and the Death Knight convulsed. Khadgar, said Thoralion, wincing a little. I can keep this up all day, Soul Ripper, Khadgar said. When there was no response, Khadgar lifted his left hand to join his right. The Death Knight screamed. From the tomb, the scepter of Sargeras! That's better. What about it? With that, the book of Medivh, the Eye of Dalaran Ner'zhul. No! Khadgar was surprised at the level of resistance the Death Knight could put up, but shared Thoralion's distaste of torture. But they were close. What can he do? Tell us! He can open portals from Draenor to other worlds! Khadgar immediately ceased tormenting the Death Knight, who flopped over, groveling in recovery. He sat, stunned for a moment, then looked up at Thoralion. He saw his own horror mirrored in the youth's face. Other worlds, Thoralion said, his voice faint with shock. Azeroth and Draenor aren't the only ones. He sat down at the Death Knight. He stared down at the Death Knight, his mouth working for the moment before anything came out. Worlds, more than ours. Worlds without end. Innocents without number falling before them. Light save us. Khadgar nodded. I know it's difficult to grasp. The horde we faced was half crazed with desperation and hunger. Their world is dying, and they needed to take ours. Now they're going to open portals to countless other worlds as well. The same scenario will be repeated again and again and again. Thoralion barely heard his friend's words. They seemed to fade away, smothered by the thudding of his own heartbeat in his ears. The hideous visage of the Death Knight, too, was fading, drowning in a slow but steady glow of white light that seemed to be coming from inside the paladin's own head. He burned to protect his people, the Alliance, all life on this world from the havoc that from the ever-hungering orcs that had chosen to wreck it. That seemed daunting enough, but now, worlds? Just how many were they talking about anyway? 1? 2? 2 million? Hysteria bubbled up inside him as he sat in the white empty space and danced on the verge of madness as he tried to comprehend the incomprehensible. The innocent were his charge. He had to protect them. But how could he possibly do so? So many who... The pounding of his heart suddenly paused, and in the place of pure bright light, he saw a figure that was light. the light itself. It hovered and glowed, gleaming as if its form was hard and crystalline, but also soft, unspeakably soft as a tear, as soft as forgiveness, as soft as Illyria's pale skin. Golden strands draped the being, and Trollian could not tell at first if they were leading from or to the creature. Then he understood it was both. All that was this being, and this being was everything. Awe flooded him, and he drank in the sight of this beautiful, luminous being, feeling it fill him with hope and calm, as if he were an empty vessel. "Do not despair," came a voice like bells, like chimes, like the sigh of an ocean. "The light is with you. We are with you. No matter how vast the darkness, light will scatter it, no matter what world, no matter what creature. The light is there, in that place, in that soul. Know this, and go forward with a joyful heart, Turallian." As if it sang in response, Turallian's heart began to beat once more. He realized it had never stopped that long, that the long frozen ramp moment had been less than a blink of an eye. Khadgar gave Turallian the space to let it sink in. Finally, Turallian lifted his head. His eyes were focused, clear, and his face was resolute. "We have to stop them," Turallian stated firmly. "We cannot let other innocent worlds have this unleashed on them. It ends here. On Azeroth, no one else should have to suffer what we have. The light shines on other worlds than ours, and it needs our help. It will have it." Khadgar heard some resentful murmurings from some of Turallian's men. Turallian heard it too, for he stood frowning. "If you have something to say, say it clearly," he ordered. The soldiers who had been talking exchanged glances, then one stood up. "Sir, why don't we just let them go? If they have fresh worlds to take, maybe they'll just go away and leave us alone." "Even if it were that simple, we can't let that happen. Don't you understand?" Turallian said. "We have to stop them. We can't save our world at the expense of countless innocent lives." "Besides," came Illyria's clear voice as she strode up to them, dusty and sweaty and spattered with blood too dark to be her own. "What is to stop them from returning once they've gotten fat off plunder?" With her sharp sense of hearing, of course, she heard everything. Khadgar thought her a trifle paler than usual, but she was almost eerily composed. Would you like to battle a horde twice the size of the one we faced during the Second War? Completely united and with the ability to open portals to Azeroth from anywhere. Khadgar saw the disappointment in Turallian's eyes. The paladin had hoped the men would understand his point, and more, he hoped Illyria would. But it seemed that Illyria was still consumed with hatred for the orcs. She did not really care about other worlds. She wanted to hunt the orcs down and kill them herself. She had no wish to let others share that particular cruel delight. She turned to Turallian, and color rose briefly in her face, then subsided. "Sir, while we are fighting, I saw something I think you should be aware of. We noticed a group of..." Khadgar was barely listening to her musical voice. Something else was nagging at his thoughts. Something was not right. He gasped as the understanding burst upon him. "You idiot!" Khadgar cried, cutting Illyria off mid-sentence. "They're not losing!" He shouted. "They're retreating! They found all the artifacts they need, and they're returning home to Draenor. The entire invasion was just a feint to distract us, and now they're done!" Gas Soul Ripper glanced up at him, shocked and fear in his glowing eyes. The Death Knight surged to his feet, snapping the stout ropes that bound his hands and feet and chest. Terror lent him magical strength as well. From somewhere deep inside, Gaz shunted aside Khadgar's mental lance and raised fresh shields that blocked the Archmage's reflective attempts to regain control. "They will not interfere!" Gaz roared, leaping atop Khadgar and wrapping his mailed hands around the Archmage's throat. "You will not thwart our destiny!" The Death Knight began to squeeze, and Khadgar gasped for air, struggling to push the creature away. Even as his vision swarmed, blackness crept in along the edges of his sight, framing wild colors flashing before him. He couldn't push the hands away. He couldn't think to summon a spell. And suddenly, though the insanely swirling palette of colors came to a flash of pure white, even as it seared Khadgar's eyes, it wrapped him in reassuring warmth and a sensation of peace sharply at odds with the pain of hands crushing his windpipe and cutting off blood briefly. He wondered if he was already dead, but hadn't gotten around to noticing yet. The light swelled, then faded. The dead hands around Khadgar's throat tightened convulsively before the pressure suddenly disappeared. Khadgar swayed, blinking, dazzled from the white light, coughing and gasping at the same time, his lungs struggling to bring air back into its body. "Are you all right?" It was Turalian, his hands still glowing softly, helping Khadgar to rise. Glancing down, Khadgar noticed that his violet robe was now dusty gray, all that was left of Gaz's Soul Ripper. He looked at Turalian, stunned again by the young general's power. Turalian read his glance and smiled sheepishly. Khadgar clasped his friend's arm. "Thank you. It was the light, not I," Turalian said with his charismatic modesty. "Well, your damned light killed him too fast." Illyria growled. Even Khadgar blinked at the venom in her voice. "We could have asked him about the carts I saw." "Carts?" Khadgar asked. "Explain." She turned to him, clearly more comfortable speaking with the mage than with Turalian. "I saw some of the orcs going through the portal, black dragons accompanying them. There were carts, several of them, all covered. They were taking things back to their worlds." "They came to get artifacts, not souvenirs," grunted Khadgar. "What would they need carts for?" Illyria shrugged. "I don't know, but I thought you should know." Another puzzle piece. Just when I thought we'd figured it out. Khadgar brushed disgustingly at his robe, then looked up at them. "We've got quite the task ahead of us. We need to send an expedition into Draenor. We have to find and kill Ner'zhul before he can open any more portals, retrieve those artifacts, especially the Book of Medivh and Gul'dan's skull, and destroy the Dark Portal for good." Turalian nodded, summoning a scout with a quick gesture. Every inch the military commander. "Send word to the Alliance Kings," he said. "The Horde is..." His words were cut off as a shadow passed over the sun. Shielding his eyes from the glare, he glanced up, then began to laugh as the shadow broke apart into several winged forms that circled down towards them. These were not arrow-straight like dragons. They were broader, stouter, and softer, covered in tawny fur and feathers of gold and white. "What took you?" Turalian called back, laughing with Khadgar as Kurgan Wildhammer, leader of the Wildhammer dwarves, shook his head and managed to look embarrassed from atop his griffin. "Hey, bad winds!" the dwarf admitted, bringing Skyrie in for a landing. The great beast landed gracefully and cawed, flapping its wings one final time before its rider dismounted. Despite the daringness of the situation, Khadgar found himself smiling. It was good to see hail, gruff Kurgan. "Your arrival is most timely," the Archmage said, stepping forward to shake the dwarf's hand and permitting his own to be enthusiastically pumped up and down. "We've a message to be delivered, and quickly." "Eh? As long as you promise me and me boys will be getting a crack at those greenskins, we'll be taking a message from you." He waved at some of the other Wildhammers, who hastened forward and stood at attention. We'll need to dispatch several messages to the various leaders," Turalian said, the grin fading. Khadgar wondered if Turalian really knew just how no nonsense he could look when he had to. "Tell them this. The orcs are retreating to Draenor, but they have found a means to open new portals to other worlds." The dwarves' eyes widened, but they didn't interrupt. "They are taking with them cartloads of something they obviously value. We do not know what yet," Turalian continued. "We intend to pursue them through the Dark Portal and stop them from opening these portals by any and all means necessary." "Are you sure, lad?" asked Kurdran quietly. Trollian nodded. Everyone stood silent for a moment, knowing that Trollian spoke what had to be done, but even so, rendered mute at the reality. Now hurry, Trollian said. Make that griffin earn her dinner. The scouts nodded, saluted, mounted their griffins, and took to the skies. Trollian turned to his friends. And now, he said somberly, we prepare to leave our world behind. Chapter 14. The rest of that day and evening was crammed with chaotic planning. Who should go? Who should stay behind? What previous provisions should they take? How long should they wait? Debates went from discussions to arguments to even shouting, and at one point Trollian thought Illyria and Kurdran might come to blows over how best to utilize the griffins. Finally, a plan was drafted that all could be satisfied with. Some, including Illyria, wanted to head out right then. My rangers can see as well or better than the orcs at night, she pointed out, and even you humans have the moonlight. No, Trollian had said, putting his foot down. We do not have your vision. We don't all have your vision, Illyria, and we're exhausted. The orcs will definitely have the advantage at night. You'll notice they're not attacking right now. Her eyes had narrowed. No, they're probably resting up so they can be fresh in the morning to have at us again, then. Trollian let her words hang there for a moment. Once she realized she'd made his arguments for him, she scowled but stayed silent. Trollian's right, Khadgar said. We're exhausted, dead on our feet. The purpose here isn't to kill as many orcs as possible and go down shouting battle cries. It's to get to the other side with as many as we can so we can stop something bigger than the handful that is at the gates right now. Trollian suspected the comment wasn't particularly directed at Illyria, but it struck home nonetheless. She'd first turned red, then white as a sheet, and stalked from the room. Trollian automatically moved to follow, but Khadgar's hand closed on his arm. Let her go, he said quietly. Talking to her now will just make things worse. She's exhausted as the rest of us right now, and isn't thinking clearly at the best of times. Let her come to you. Let her come to you, Trollian wondered, as always, how much the young old mage knew, and if the phrase had been calculated or casual. Vera, a moment, said Illyria as she and her second-in-command left the meeting room for their assigned barracks. She indicated that the other elf follow her outside onto the walkway underneath the moon and the stars. Wordlessly, Verena obeyed. There had never been any question but that Illyria would be among those going through the portal at dawn tomorrow. Vera and a few others would remain behind to aid the Sons of Lothar in case something went wrong. Vera turned inquiringly to her commander. I have a special task for you. One that goes beyond your military duties, Illyria began. It is not mundane to think that I might not return. That none of us might. We do not know what we face on the other side. Venera looked troubled. They had been friends for decades, but she nodded. Of course. If I do not come back, do not come home. Bear a message from me to my family. Tell them I took the fight to the orcs' own world to avenge Quel'Thalas, and to keep our people safe from future attacks. She thought of Trollian's impassioned, impeccable words, that they could not release the horror that was the horde on other innocent people. A lump suddenly swelled in her throat. Tell them, she continued, her voice rough, tell them I want to try to save other worlds as well. Others who will, I pray, never know the pain of what we underwent. Tell them I chose to do this of my own free will, and that whatever happens to me, my heart is with them. She fumbled in a pouch and emerged with 3 small necklaces. Each was graced with a glowing, beautiful gem, an emerald, a ruby, and a sapphire. Vera gasped. and looked up, clearly recognizing the sounds. Yes, they're from the necklace my parents gave me, Illyria confirmed. I had the necklace melted down in Stormwind and 3 lockets made from it. I will keep this one. She selected the emerald and fastened it about her throat. I want to give the other 2 to Verisa and Sylvanas She bit her lower lip. Please take these home with you when you are able to return. Give them to my sisters. Tell them this way no matter what happens. We will always be together. Vanera's eyes shone with tears that slipped down her cheeks. Illyria invaded her ability to weep. The other rangers studied the inscriptions, which Illyria knew by heart. To Sylvanas, love always, Illyria. To Verisa, with love, Illyria. You will return, my lady, she gave, and give these to your sisters yourself. But for now, I will keep them safe until you do. This I swear. Vanera hugged her tightly, and Illyria stiffened. She had not allowed anyone to touch her other than a perfunctorily manner stints. Illyria let her arms go around her friend and hugged Vanera back for a long moment, then dismissed her. Vanera saluted, wiped her face, and hurried back to their barracks. Illyria lingered, letting the fresh air calm her. An ear twitched as she heard soft steps. Quickly, she faded into the shadows, frowning to herself as she recognized Tyralion. He walked to the wall and leaned against it. His broad shoulders bowed in the moonlight. Her sharp ears heard her name whispered. Her sharp eyes caught a glitter of tears. She turned and vanished, moving silently along the way she had come. The talk with Vanera had unnerved her significantly. To speak with Tyralion now could undo everything she had worked so hard to create over the last 2 years. She would not risk it. The general of the Alliance forces stood alone in the moonlight. Despite his advice to his troops, he had found himself unable to sleep. Kagar's words and Illyria's expressions had haunted him, and his mind went back, as it had countless times before over the last 2 years, to the night when his whole world had changed. He barely heard the soft whisper above the pounding of the rain on the field tent. And at first, Tyralion thought it was merely wishful thinking when he heard Illyria's voice whisper, Tyralion. He lifted his head, and in the dim orange glow of the brazier saw her standing just inside the tent. Illyria, by the lights, you're drenched. Tyralion leaped up from his cot, clad only in a pair of light linen breeches, and rushed to her. Shivering, the elf gazed up at him mutely, her eyes wide, her glorious golden hair plastered to her skin. 1,000 questions crowed Tyralion's lips. When had she gotten back? What had happened? And most importantly, why was she here in his tent alone at this hour? All of that would wait. She was soaked and chilled, and as she reached to undo her cloak, he found it to be as wet as if she had fallen in a lake. Here, he said, tossing the sodden thing away. Stand close to the brazier. I'll get you something dry to wear. His matter-of-fact tone seemed to hearten her, and she nodded, stretching out small hands to the warmth of the glowing embers, while he rummaged through his trunk. He found a shirt, breeches, tabard, and cloak. She swimmed them, but they were dry. She turned to see that Illyria hadn't moved. Something was very wrong indeed. Come on, he said, gently, and led her to the trunk, sitting her down on it, usually so self-controlled, almost haunting at this moment. Illyria looked like a despairing child. Biting his lips against the question, Tyralion knelt and drew off her boot. Almost an inch of water was in them, and her feet were icy to the touch. He rubbed them briskly, noting how delicate and pale they were, until they warmed somewhat, then rose and helped her to her feet. "Here are some dry clothes," he said, steering her back toward the brazier. "Change into these, and I'll get something hot for you to drink. Then we'll talk." Tarlian pressed the clothes into her hand and turned his back, blushing a little. He heard a soft rustling behind him and waited for her to tell him she was ready for him to turn around. He inhaled swiftly as he felt a pair of small hands slipped around his waist from behind, and a slender figure pressed against his back. Tarlian did not move at once, then. Slowly, took the cold hands in his, lifted them gently, and pressed them to his heart. It was racing. He shivered as he felt chilled lips pressed a soft kiss to his shoulders, and closed his eyes. How long had he wanted this? Dreamed of it. He realized early on that he had fallen head over heels in love with Illyria, but until recently, he had never expected the emotion to be returned. Over the last few weeks, however, it seemed to him she had sought out his company and had contrived to touch him more often, though still in a teasing manner, and now... "I'm cold," she whispered, her voice thick. "So cold." Unable to bear it any longer, Trellian turned round in her embrace, sliding his hands up her bare back in awe of how silky her pale skin was beneath his calloused, war-roughened hands. The dim light of the brazier caught the gleam of 3 gems on a necklace that encircled a long, swan-like throat, and turned her skin warm and golden. His vision blurred as she turned her face up at him, and he blinked back tears of an emotion so profound it shook his very soul. "Illyria," he whispered into her long, pointed ears. Suddenly he tightened his arms around her, holding her close, pressing her against him. "Let me warm you," he said brokenly. "Let me take away whatever it is that is hurting you, that is frightening you. I can't stand the thought of you in pain." He would do no more, ask for nothing more. He was terrified that at any minute she would recover, tell him she was simply playing with him, and retreat to a respectable distance to discuss tactics or strategy with him. Trallian would let her, if that is what she wanted, if that was what she needed to recover, to get the light and life back in her eyes, to banish this terrifying stillness. She did not pull away. Instead, she reached to touch his face. "Trallian," she whispered, and then in her native tongue, "Valendo Aranu." He cupped her face in his hands in turn, feeling the delicate bones of her cheeks, realizing that for all her skill and energy and fire, she was fragile. She'd never let him see her fragility before. Water rolled down her cheek, and for a moment he thought she wept. He realized an instant later that it was only a drop of rain from her sodden hair. Slowly, tentatively, he bent to kiss her. She responded at once, passionately, wrapping her arms around his neck. Trollian felt dizzy as he drew back. She whispered, "Cold. So cold." He picked her up in his arms, astounded at how light she was, to bear, placed her on the cot, and drew the furs around them both, and they were warm. Trollian rubbed at the strained, tired eyes, blinking back what he insisted on thinking of as tears of exhaustion. After a single night together, she had been gone the next morning. He had emerged from his tent to news that shocked him to the core. Illyria and her rangers, of course, had returned from their scouting mission. He learned that gray morning, his eyes widened with compassion and pain that the Horde had cut a dreadful swath through Quel'Thalas, and that Illyria had personally lost no fewer than 18 kin of various degrees of closeness. Cousins, aunts, nephews, uncles, and among the dead was her younger brother. He rushed to her, but when his hands closed on her shoulder, she wrenched away. He tried to talk to her, but she brushed his words aside. It was as if they had never been lovers, as if they'd never been friends. Trollian felt something break inside him at that moment, something he had since pushed aside and let scar over. Because he was a general, he was a leader, and he could not afford to indulge his personal pain. But when he'd seen her that day in Stormwind, soaked again to the bone, he hoped. Well, he'd been a fool to hope. But a fool he would be, then, to the rest of his days, for despite everything, Trollian knew that he would always love Illyria Windrunner and hold fast to the one night together as the brightness and most beautiful of this whole brief life. They come! Rexar's voice was deep and calm. Grom looked into where the half-ogres pointed and nodded. So they do, he said, and gripped Gorhow as his eyes brightened in anticipation of the slaughter to come. It was no token force that was left behind as the rest of the clans departed Azeroth. The Alliance would face fearsome opponents this day. His glowing red eyes narrowed as he saw the numbers flooding across the dead land. They had come in force indeed. Where was the leader, the one who had left his men to die to ride for a warning? Grom particularly ached to kill him. Beside his master, Heretha whiffed in anticipation. Rexar chuckled at his pet wolf. Come, Alliance! Murmured Grom. Gorhal is thirsty! Trollian reined in his horse as the group cleared the ring of hills that encircled the small basin and beheld a portal. If the orcs were indeed retreating, there were still plenty of them left behind. It was not going to be an easy canter to the portal. They'd have to fight their way through the ominous line of green-skinned beings and the huge, towering, pale things that fought alongside them. Two warriors in particular drew his attention. Trollian was not even entirely certain one of them was an orc. He resembled one, but his skin was yellowish-brown, not green, and he towered over the others. His build, too, seemed somewhat different. Beside him stood a black wolf that Trollian suspected was as deadly and focused as his master. A powerful warrior, yes, but not the leader. There, that one. Larger than most, with a thick mane of black hair pulled into a topknot, a black jaw, glowing red eyes, a heavy bracers decorated with strange symbols. He stared boldly up at the superior number of Alliance warriors. Their eyes met, even as Trollian watched the orc leader lift a mammoth axe in salute. We're ready for you this time, bastards! Daneth murmured. His eyes were bright, and he was more than eager for battle, as was every soldier present. Sons of Lothar, attack! Trollian cried. His troops let out a yell of their own and streamed down from all sides. The battle was on. It was a simple plan. Kill as many orcs as possible while heading straight for the portal. Trollian fought fiercely, swinging his hammer left and right and beating back the snarling forces that surged up to block the path. Close by him fought Illyria, seemingly as grimly joyful in the slaughter as ever. Some sixth sense prickled at him, and he looked up just in time to see the elven ranger bring a sword down on one hopeless orc while another loomed up behind her, lifting a brutal-looking club. She didn't seem to notice the threat. Her face was alight with harsh glee as she pulled her sword free from the green corpse. She was too focused, too intent on revenge. Illyria! Trollian cried, clapping his heel to his warhorse and galloping towards her. As if in slow motion, Illyria raised her golden head, her eyes widened, her arms lifting the bloody sword to block the blow, but she was too slow, and he would never get there in time. The prayer left his lips as he thrust his hand forward. White light shone forward and struck the orc square in the chest. He arced backwards, the club trembling helpless from his grasp, and he crumpled to the earth. For the briefest of instants, Trollian's gaze locked with Illyria's, and she was on to the next orc, and he too had turned back into the fray. His eyes fell upon the orc leader he spotted earlier. He seemed to dance through the Alliance forces, the heavy axe at his hand shrieking as it cut air and flesh alike, and the sound rose above the screams and groans of his many victims. He paused now and then to shout at point. But powerful though he was, and his warriors were outnumbered, and by the look on his face he knew it. The wave of Alliance kept moving inexorably forward to the portal. The orc seemed to make a decision. He turned and shouted something to a cloaked figure next to the portal itself, and the figure nodded. Then the leader bellowed something else, and all across the valley his orcs hastened to obey, backing away from the Alliance and retreating slowly but surely toward the waiting portal. Another movement caught Tyrellian's eye. The cloaked figure reached down and pulled something from beside the portal's rightmost pillar. Tyrellian couldn't make out what it was, but it was metal and glinted in the light. Something about the way he fiddled with it made Tyrellian nervous for some reason. His mind went back to his conversation with the gnome Mechatork. How safe would it be?
I'm willing to bet it will be eventually as safe as the safest gnomist creation ever.
The orcs were suddenly trying to get through, whereas before they had fought. Khadgar had confirmed they had the artifacts they needed and were likely ready to. Damn it! Tyrellian cried. He hoped he was wrong. He looked over to the sea of fighting men and orcs and saw Khadgar and another group of magi. He rode towards them, grasping out what he had seen. Khadgar frowned and listened. If I were them, I'd head for home too. But first, I'd destroy the portal behind me so no one could interfere. My thoughts exactly. I think it's something mechanical, like something the gnomes would make. Or the goblins, said Khadgar. Both men knew that, unlike the gnomes, who were firmly on the Alliance side, the recently encountered goblins happily sold their mechanical gizmos to both sides. We destroyed the last portal. They can certainly destroy this one. And without Medivh's book and Gaudan's skull, I doubt I could reopen it. Then let's go. I'll hold them off, Tyrellian said, already wheeling his horse to charge the portal. Khadgar was right behind him. Tyrellian battered away at the orcs, cutting a path through them like a man possessed. Khadgar bore down on the portal, and the figure adjusting something beside it. Leaning over in his saddle, Khadgar slashed at the figure, who turned at the last second, though not fast enough to avoid a blow to the neck. It wasn't a strong enough blow to kill him at once, but the cloaked figure grunted in pain and dropped the device, his hands flying to his neck. Swinging down from his horse, Khadgar ran over and grabbed up the strange machine. It was the size of a small shield, definitely mechanical, and it was making an odd ticking noise. He analyzed it quickly, but the construction was too alien. There was no way he could stop it. Whatever it had been intended to do, it was going to do it soon. Grunting, the mage lifted the package and threw it as far as he could, augmenting his physical strength with magic so it arced out over the valley and looked like it might even glance off the cliff walls alongside. The explosion rocked the entire valley. Grom swore and ducking and covering his head, feeling stings along his back and shoulders where he had been peppered with small fragments of shattered rock. He looked up, rage burning inside him, and strode with dreadful purpose to the warlock Krakul. Krakul looked as shocked as Grom felt, and cowered as Grom's fist descended. Traitor! You would kill us! No, I swear, I was told it was a shield to protect us. I didn't know! Red swarmed before Grom's eyes as he lifted the cringing warlock with one hand and shook him. How he wanted to crush the orc's windpipe, to rip his head off and throw it as the elderly human had thrown the device that Grom had been told would protect them, but instead nearly killed them. Who told you this? Where is he? I may tear his heart out. Roughly, he shook the warlock, curbing his bloodlust with great effort. I don't know. Malkor was sent to do it. He told me it was a shield. Cursing, Grom hurled the worthless wretch away and turned back to the fight. Grom had been told the device was his shield, so that at the last moment the Warsong clan could safely escape. He'd been lied to. Someone in a position of power, Gorfiend, Ner'zhul, had intended that the warriors left behind would not escape with their lives. Grom vowed to survive this battle, unlikely as it seemed, so that someone would pay. The explosion had rattled his people. The Alliance had recovered more quickly than the Orcs, and Grom saw, furious and helpless, that they were being herded like beasts to the southwest, yet he could do nothing about it. One group came from one side, a second blocked off the exit from the other, forcing the Orcs back into a narrow valley mouth, away from the portal, away from home. "So be it!" he growled. The Alliance might have this victory, but it would cost them dearly. He threw his head back, opened his jaw wide, and let forth a scream that froze two Alliance warriors in mid-swing. "Fight, my war song! Fight like the Orcs you are! Let your blood sing with battle lust! Tear them to pieces for the Horde!" "Someone has to stay here and watch this crew," Thralian said, reining in beside Illyria and Khadgar and waiting for Kurdran to circle low enough to hear the conversation. "I'll station some men at the mouth of this valley to keep them from escaping again. Everyone else—" He fell silent. Khadgar didn't envy him. No one really wanted to go through the dark portal, although he had to admit a small part of him, the part that had led him to become a mage in the first place, was very curious about what lay beyond it. "Well," Thralian said, "we know what we need to do. Each of you, tell your units one more time that this is a volunteer expedition. I will not force any soldier to cross worlds if he does not wish to." Daneth nodded and wheeled his mount away, bellowing orders. Illyria turned back to her rangers and spoke softly to them in their musical language. Khadgar gave Thralian a reassuring smile, but the paladin didn't return it. Quietly he said to Khadgar, "Illyria was almost killed today. I was barely able to save her." "Thralian," Khadgar said, equally quiet. "She's a trained warrior. She can outfight both of us, probably. You know that." "That is not what I am worried about. I know she can handle herself normally, but she gets careless. She gets..." His voice faltered, and Khadgar had to look away from the pain on the youth's face. "She puts killing orcs for her own safety," Khadgar said. "She takes undue risk." Thralian nodded miserably. "Well, now we take the fight to them. Thralian, it could be good for her, both of you." Thralian flushed slightly, but didn't answer. His eyes were on his troops now, as he guided his horse so that he was among them. "Sons of Lothar!" he cried. "We have faced battle before, we have faced loss and defeat, and known victory. Now we face the unknown." He caught Khadgar's eye and smiled slightly. "We take the fight to them, and we stop them, so they never trouble us or other innocent worlds ever again. For the Alliance! For the light!" He lifted his hammer, and a cheer rose up as the hammer began to glow with a sharp, clear, white radiance. Khadgar nodded to himself. This was what both he and Anduin Lothar had sensed in Thralian when they had first met him. It seemed a lifetime ago now. Both the Alliance commander and the mage had known even then that this priest-turned-holy warrior would rise to the challenge, would blend an almost innocent and inherent decency with a fierce determination to protect his people, would stand now at the head of an army, rallying them to cross into a completely new world. Khadgar wondered if his friend really saw how much he inspired his soldiers, and how he inspired one in particular who was looking at him now with an all too rare, unguarded expression on her beautiful elven face. Thralian turned his horse and spurred it up the stone ramp toward the dark portal itself, his steed shield resisting, but Thralian held the reins firm and forced it on. The swirling light beckoned as he passed through it, its greenish glow overpowering his own white light for an instant before he vanished completely between the columns. Illyria and Khadgar were right behind him. The mage wrestled with his horse and felt a curious sensation as man and beast entered the rift. A ripple of cold and tugging feeling, as if strong currents pulled at him. A chill swept over him, and for an instant he saw blackness and stars and swirls and flashes of strange color all mingled together. Then he was emerging, and the hot air warmed his skin, had grown unexpectedly cold during the brief crossing. Bright. It was so very bright. He automatically lifted his hands to shield his eyes from the glare, and hot, too hot, a dry, savage heat that struck Kagar as being almost physical. He blinked, letting his eyes adjust, and gasped. He stood on a stone, dwarfed by a version of the portal that was as huge and elaborate as the one they had just crossed through. He perfunctorily and hesitantly assembled statues of hooded men towered on either side. The stairs led down to a second courtyard flanked by enormous suddenly burning braziers. 2 pillars topped with fire stood on either side of the strangely made road, and the crack-red, barren plain that stretched before them was somewhat familiar, evocated of blasted lands. Even as he stared in the distance, in the disguised earth cracked open, fire leapt upwards as if a dragon were hatching, breaking through the earth as if it formed its shell. But Kagar's eyes were fixed on the sky. It was red, the deep red of flesh blood. High above shone an angry crimson sun, its heat beating down upon them, and light help him. The sky, too, was familiar. "No," he said in a broken voice. "No," he whispered again. "Not here. Not like this." "What is it?" Illyria asked him. He ignored her. It was all as it was in the vision, the sky, the land. "Khadgar, what's wrong?" He started as if waking up, but the horrible scene before him did not dissipate. He shook his head and forced a wan smile. "Nothing," he lied, then realized how transparent that falsehood was. He cursed himself. "I have had visions of this place before. I hadn't expected. I didn't think I would have to face them so soon. It overwhelmed me for a second. My apologies." Illyria frowned up at him, concerned, but saw that he was not going to explain further. "It is." She closed her mouth, unable to find the words. She put a hand to her heart as if physically hurt, and for a moment Kagar roused from his own despair to pity her. She was an elf, a child of the forest and trees and growing healthy lands. She looked stunned, sickened, almost as sick as Khadgar felt. Out of nowhere, a wind kicked up. With no plants to anchor the soil, the greedy blast seized the dead, dusty soil and scoured them with it. They all coughed and reached for something, anything, to cover their mouths and nose and eyes. This was it, Khadgar suddenly realized. In that stepping through the portal, he had stepped forward into a destiny he had hoped would be a long time coming. In the vision, he looked as he had now, an old man, and now he was here. Damn it! I'm just 22! Am I going to die here? He thought sickly, trying to recover. I've hardly even lived. The wind died down as quickly as it had come. "Ugh, this place!" Daneth Trollbane said, coughing as he drew up alongside them. Khadgar latched onto the steady warrior's matter-of-fact demeanor for support. "And it is to me, or do the blasted lands look a lot like this as well?" Khadgar nodded. It was good to have something else to focus on. This world was leaking into ours through the rift, and whatever caused this damage, I suspect it was their warlocks and the dark magic they wield, began to affect ours as well. He forced himself to analyze their surroundings with dispassionate eye. It was not just dead. It looked like this world had been sucked dry. What had the orcs done to this place? We managed to halt the process on Azeroth, thank the light, but clearly the land here has suffered the same injury for only much longer. I suspect this world was far more benign once. Olivia frowned. The road. It. She went suddenly pale, then her lovely face contorted in anger. Those monsters. Trollian had cantered up beside her. What is it? The road. Olivia seemed unable to find the words. She tried again. It's paved with bones. They all fell silent. Surely Illyria was mistaken. The road she indicated was no small path. It was a road, proper, meant for dozens to ride abreast, for huge engines of war to traverse. It was wider than the bridge over the water that led to Stormwind, and so long that it trailed out of sight. For it to be paved with bones would mean that hundreds, no, thousands of bodies had. Merciful light, a young man whispered. He'd gone starkly white, and murmurs rose behind him, even as the troops registered this horrific information. The enemy showed itself. Only a few orcs had been near the dark portal when they passed through. Khadgar had hoped they had been the only ones they'd fight upon entering the orcs' world, but those few had time to summon reinforcements. Along a ridge beyond the Road of the Dead, Khadgar could now see dozens of orcs, their weapons glinting in the harsh red light. For the first time since this whole nightmarish with the rift had started, Khadgar thought the soldiers might falter. It is a small army, he said softly. Orcs have been in all his visions as well. Orcs standing on ridges, bellowing and snarling, cursing. We have an army of our own, Illyria said, looking at Trollian. We do, Trollian replied, emotion making his voice crack. He too had been shaken by their first sight of this world, but now he wore a look of passionate resolve. An army that will stand between the orcs and those they would harm. That will not stand by and watch its own world suffer as this poor place has. He looked back at his troops. Sons of Lothar, he shouted, this is the fight we were made for. More than ever before, we fight for our world now. We will not permit them to do to us or others what they have done here. His voice carried, clear and pure and strong, as bright and shining as the hammer he now lifted. For Stormwind, for Lordaeron, for Ironforge, for Gnomeregan, for Azeroth! So be it, Khadgar thought, and followed his general into the fray.